Why can't the religious just take themselves out of the picture? What's wrong with their heads that they can't just set aside their fifis and faith and evaluate things as they actually are, not as they desperately wish them to be? We're going to try to investigate that a little bit today, not that it's really going to change anything. So strap in because we're going on a wild ride. I said a couple of weeks ago now that I wanted to cover some outsiders test for faith stuff, mostly because it really drives the point home that the religious are the problem. It's not us, it's them. Just really wanting to believe doesn't mean anything. Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity fame gave me the perfect mechanism to evaluate this on his website, so we're going to take a couple of weeks, and that should make the Supercuts fans happy, to go over his objections. I don't think it's going to make any difference, but it's not like we have anything better to do, right? So let's get right into it. So, I want to get some of this out of the way up front. This is part of a 3-part series that he put up on his Capturing Christianity website way back in 2017. We're going to take on each part of this series in an individual video, so look forward to this being a series once a week for the next couple. The reason I brought this up is because most theists, they don't really want to talk about it at all. In fact, I was kind of surprised that Cameron was brave enough in the first place, so credit for actually doing so, but not for how he did it. You'll figure that out as we go on. Because the whole point of the outsider's test for faith is to apply the same standards to your own faith that you would apply to others. And the religious, as we know, they can't do that. Cameron can't do that, as I think you're going to see. And I haven't even read any of these articles further than what you see here yet. There is always going to be a double standard, and the whole point of the outsider's test for faith is to do away with that double standard. So I'm going to jump over the first bit here where he explains the whole setup, and you can of course go and read that on your own if you'd like, and what he's going to talk about in each article, which doesn't really matter because we're going to go over the articles themselves. It's really not that important. And we'll just start at his very first point, which is talking about the test itself. So let's get going. First, he takes the definition from a 2009 article over on John Loftus's blog, so we'll just read through that to start. The outsider's test is simply a challenge to test one's own religious faith with the presumption of skepticism as an outsider. It calls upon believers to test or examine your religious beliefs as if you were outsiders with the same presumptions of skepticism that you use to test or examine other religious beliefs. Its presumption is that when examining any set of religious beliefs, skepticism is warranted, since the odds are good that the particular set of religious beliefs that you have adopted are wrong. And I think that's a very good way to start, because religion begins with the presupposition that everything it teaches is true a priori, and we need to back out of that. That is something that I've been advocating for many years. Go all the way back to the beginning and walk us through all the steps, leaving your faith and your fifis behind. I have never once found a single theist who could actually do that. They will all just assume things, assert things, embrace the stuff that they like for emotional reasons, and then just presume that it's got to be true. And you can't do that. You have to be able to justify it all to someone who doesn't already take it as gospel truth. So next, he gives 6 criteria for doing this, and I don't think it's much of a surprise that Cameron disagrees with all of it. The amount of skepticism warranted depends on 1. The number of rational people who disagree, 2. Whether the people who disagree are separated into distinct geographical locations, 3. The nature of those beliefs, 4. How they originated, 5. How they were personally adopted in the first place, and 6, the kinds of evidence that can possibly be used to decide between them. My claim is that when it comes to religious beliefs, a high degree of skepticism is warranted because of those factors. Now, I don't know just how much I agree with all of those. For the first, for instance, how do you define rational? Because the religious are going to automatically assume that everyone on their side is rational, even if they're not. They just really want it to be true. And this is a problem I've had with a lot of people who just say, well, rational is if you can just come up with a reason that sounds good to you. That's not rational. Rational depends on being based on logic, reason, and evidence. If you're not using those criteria, your decisions are not rational. Therefore, let's skip all of that crap. In fact, I think we can really throw all of those out and just stick with number 6. What evidence is there for the claim that is being made? How do you demonstrate that it's actually true, regardless of your feelings on the matter? Because your feelings don't mean anything. So let's focus on that one primarily as we move on, although we will go through all of Cameron's objections. So, as I said, now we go on to Cameron's complaints. Keep in mind, this is now Cameron responding. This is not John Loftus. I'm trying to keep them separated, so, try to keep up. According to Loftus, there are at least 6 considerations that together warrant a position of skepticism. Now, he's not saying that only a position of skepticism is warranted. Actually, I think that's what he's really saying. Rather, he's saying that each religious person must subject their religious beliefs to the crucible of reason. In defense of B, he says, if after having investigated your religious faith with the presumption of skepticism, it passes intellectual muster, then you can have your religious faith. It's that simple. If not, you must abandon it like I did. But that's exactly what he's saying, because one shouldn't take any position unless it can pass intellectual muster. Here's where the religious really try to apply a double standard to their own beliefs. My beliefs are special. Says who? This is why you need to get rid of the double standards. Nobody's beliefs are special. There are things that are actually true in the world that we all share. Those are true for you, for me, for everyone. It doesn't matter how you feel about those things. They're still true. There is no your truth or my truth. There's only the truth. This is, I figure, Loftus's whole point, or at least it would be mine if I was the one who came up with the whole thing. The religious are claiming that their beliefs are true, but they're not applying the same standards to their beliefs that they are to everything else in reality. If somebody just came running up to them and claimed Godzilla was attacking the city, would they apply faith? No, of course not. They'd be demanding to see Godzilla. We are just demanding to see their Godzilla. We don't have to have these double standards, and neither should they. Notice what he's saying. Loftus is saying that religious belief must pass all 7 of his considerations, otherwise it ought to be abandoned. What can we make of this argument? Well, 6 standards, at least 6 numbered standards, but we've already addressed that. Because here's the real problem. These are not things that you should only apply to religion. These are things that you should apply to absolutely everything. Everything in your life you should look at skeptically. You don't want to say, well, these apply to this, but not to that. No, that's the double standard we're trying to get rid of. Your religious beliefs, your fifis, don't matter. And that's the whole point of this. Get over yourself. Figure out if the things that you believe are actually true. And don't ask, do I like it? Ask if it's true. But that's not how this works for the religious, is it? What I figure Cameron is going to pull here is, but I don't like that. Well, nobody cares what you like. This is really an attempt to pull you out of the picture because you don't matter. And that's something that a lot of people just can't handle. Reality exists beyond you. If you had never been born, then the question of whether or not a God exists would still be ongoing. This is something that a lot of people have a real problem with. Too bad. Get over yourself. Now he's going to get into some big time complaining, so I guess we should get to that next. The genetic fallacy. As I mentioned in my post on wish fulfillment, which granted we didn't read, so use your imagination, in our reasoning, we must always be careful to avoid the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is committed when a conclusion is rejected because of how a person came to believe it. For example, consider the following claim. Lisa was brainwashed as a child into thinking that people are generally good. Therefore, people are not generally good. The fact that Lisa was brainwashed as a child says nothing about whether people are generally good. Likewise, the fact that the religious beliefs are generally tied to specific geographical locations says nothing about whether Christianity or any other religion is true or false. But see, this is the problem. He's saying, I came to this conclusion in a way that I happen to like, therefore my conclusion is true, instead of taking himself completely out of the equation at all. His example is just ridiculously flawed, but I guess we can use it. Cameron was brainwashed as a child into thinking that God was real. That doesn't mean that God is real. It also doesn't mean that God isn't real. That's why we need to take Cameron out of the picture, because his brainwashing means absolutely nothing to the question being asked. In both of these, whether for Lisa or for Cameron, their experience is entirely irrelevant. People are either generally good or not good, and God either exists or does not exist, whether Lisa or Cameron had been born or not. The genetic fallacy that he's trying to use here is just flawed. The goodness of people or the existence of God isn't linked in any way to how these people grew up. But that's not what we're trying to say here, is it? We're trying to find out if these assertions are true at all, entirely beyond Lisa or Cameron's experiences. Their personal perspectives are irrelevant. They need to stop pretending that they are. But here's another problem that I see some people having. Some will say, well, that's all that Lisa knows, therefore her conclusion is rational. Now, if Lisa is an adult, which is an assumption, but let's make it, then we have to hold Lisa accountable for not being a moron. There comes a point in time where "damn stupid" has to stop being a thing. There comes a point where you should know better. There comes a point where we just have to hold people accountable. Cameron should know better. In fact, he does know better because it's been explained to him many times. He just doesn't like it. But not liking a thing is not a rational response. The question, is this true, is not an emotional one. It's an evidential one. Yet people like Cameron, they don't care. They are not remotely concerned about the factual reality of their beliefs. They just really want to believe it. But that is not how you behave rationally. Now, some Christians think it's enough to say genetic fallacy as if they've dealt soundly with any objection having to do with belief origins. This is a big mistake. Beliefs that have questionable origins can still pose a threat to the subject's having warrant. Gettier argued over 50 years ago that beliefs arising as a matter of luck do not constitute knowledge. So if it's mere happenstance that you were born in America and it's pure luck that you're a Christian, then you technically wouldn't know that Christianity is true. For the record, there is no reason to think that the antecedent of this conditional is true. Then they don't understand the genetic fallacy or what people are saying. The question that's being asked is, are your beliefs rational? Now, you don't have to care about that. Most theists don't, but it is still a valid question. To determine rationality, we need to get you to look at your beliefs without all of the irrational stuff that you've been carting around in your head. And that means your faith and your fifis go away. And if you can't do that, then you've already answered the question. Your beliefs are not rational. But let's move on to the next one. Equal weight theory. The first of Loftus's 7 considerations, I still think it's 6, but whatever, is related to the problem of religious diversity. See this post, which we're not going to read, so it doesn't really matter. There are so many religious claims and beliefs available, he says, that belief in any one of them ought to be met with skepticism. And that's true. Belief in anything ought to be met with skepticism. I don't care about religious diversity, although the fact that Christianity, for instance, is so diverse with more than 45,000 distinct sects, that ought to make you even more skeptical that any individual one is actually true. That this religion that claims to be the one true religion, its followers can't seem to agree on anything. Now, he's got some more coming up, and I'll wait to address it until he does, but it's very interesting that so far he's only got excuses for the things that he doesn't like. He's not actually addressing anything that Loftus, or really any atheists, are actually saying. He's just showing how much he really wants to believe. This argument uses what philosopher Joseph Kim calls equal weight theory. This theory says that one should give equal weight to an epistemic peer's belief or opinion in the case of disagreement. Two people are epistemic peers when they have roughly the same intelligence, access to the same evidence, and so on. But we really don't, and honestly, we really shouldn't. Which is why we rely on external criteria more than, well, it sounds good to me. That's why we rely on that external evidence. That's why you have to take yourself out of it, because you don't matter. He also throws in the whole roughly same intelligence thing, which, yeah, I don't think we can rely on that, because having the same basic brain structure doesn't mean you're looking at the world on a rational or intellectual plane. It doesn't mean you're using the brain the right way. If you're applying blind faith, then you're doing intelligence wrong. So he does put this in syllogistic form, so let's just go look at that next. Here's what the argument looks like in syllogistic form. 1. It is unreasonable to hold one's views in the face of disagreement, since one would need positive reason to privilege one's views over one's opponent. 2. No such reason is available, since the disagreeing parties are epistemic peers and have access to the same evidence. 3. Therefore, one should give equal weight to the opinion of an epistemic peer and to one's own opinion in the case of epistemic disagreement. But see, here's the thing. Opinions don't matter. The opinions of flat earthers mean absolutely nothing when it comes to the actual shape of the earth. They are not applying evidence in their conclusions. They just really want to believe. And what you want to believe doesn't make it true. What you want to believe is irrelevant when we are after actual demonstrable facts. And in this instance, we know that's not what the religious are after. As I've said before, there is no scientific institute for the existence of God. They don't actually care if God is real. The idea that it makes them feel good is irrelevant. The idea means nothing to the objective fact. He does continue though, so let's see where this argument leads. In his work, Kim gives 3 objections to this argument. I'll briefly summarize them. First, it is not clear that 2 is true. If we go back to number 2, it says, no such reason is available since the disagreeing parties are epistemic peers and have access to the same evidence. Yeah, but not really, because the religious have an entirely made-up epistemic system and they don't care about the actual evidence available. How many creationists have you run into who say, well, I don't care about the evidence for evolution? Well, you kinda should, but they don't, because this isn't an intellectual exercise for them. It's an emotional one. They are not evaluating the same evidence with the same criteria. So it's no wonder they don't come to the same conclusions, because they're not using the same system. They are not our epistemic peers. They don't care about having a rational, evidence-based epistemology. I mean, seriously, go listen to Ken Ham sometime. He just makes a complete fucking fool of himself. Their goals are not the same as our goals. And that's why we have to ask all the questions that we do. Because they just don't care. There's no reason to assume that, for instance, any given Christian and any given Muslim have access to the same evidence. For example, perhaps the Holy Spirit has successfully repaired the Christian's cognitive faculties while the Muslims are still broken due to sin. Yeah, but there's no reason to assume that sin is even a thing. This is really the problem. They have no reason to believe the things that they do. They just really want it to be true. Just believing it doesn't make it true, though, and they're not after the truth. They're just after comfort. They just want to feel good. This is why they absolutely are not on the same intellectual plane that we are. I'm sorry that hurts their pathetic little fifis, but, well, all right, actually I'm not. Secondly, if equal weight theory is true, then it would cause us all to give up all sorts of common sense beliefs. Take the belief that other minds exist. It may surprise you to learn that some people deny this. But then, if equal weight theory is true, their epistemic peers, you and me, are required to take a stance of agnosticism toward this belief. We would no longer rationally believe that our parents, our friends, and our families have minds. But surely, this is absurd. But see, here's the thing. Reality isn't based on common sense. It's based on evidence. Yes, there is a point at which we just have to assume that others exist. Because if others don't exist, then we can't have a conversation, can we? There is no way past the problem of hard solipsism. Deal with it. Other than that, though, the things that we can compare to each other seem to be pretty objective, don't they? If I drop a rock, it falls at the exact same speed, under the exact same conditions, as if you drop a rock. That's not common sense, that's experimentation and objective validation. Common sense is hardly even a thing, and in fact, common sense is often wrong. By common sense, if you look up in the sky, the sun and the moon are roughly the same size. I mean, after all, eclipses work, don't they? They're just not the same size in reality. The only reason the moon looks larger is because it's so much closer to the Earth. Common sense says that matter is solid. We just know that it's not in actuality. If you're relying on common sense, then you are an idiot. And that's why you need evidence, and why people like Cameron, they just can't figure out why they're wrong so often. Common sense isn't really even a thing. Knock it off. But here's another thing that I just thought of. We're going to go back to what he said, but you notice how he said it, right? But my parents and my friends and my family, I can't assume that they don't have brains. I can't assume that they don't exist. Guess what that is? That's an emotional reaction. Not a rational one, not an intellectual one, emotional. Because that's what these people tend to be. Emotional. And that's where they go wrong. Because they can't be anything but emotional. They can't actually use that 3-pound sack of meat on the top of their necks. That's where they go wrong. I wish they could figure it out. Third, and this objection seals the deal, not everyone agrees that equal weight theory is true. For instance, I don't agree that it is. But given equal weight theory, any of my epistemic peers that accept it are now obliged to reject it. Kim argues the same argument works at the academic level. Equal weight theory is therefore self-defeating. Now, I'll be really honest, equal weight theory is just stupid. Unless we're working from the same data sets with the same methodologies toward the same goals, there is no reason at all to give all ideas equal weight. Just because some people think they've seen Bigfoot, that doesn't mean that they've seen Bigfoot. Just because some people believe in aliens, that doesn't mean aliens are real. It's the reality that matters, not the nonsensical, common sense, emotional bullshit that a lot of these people are actually after. That's the whole point of the outsider's test for faith, to take away all of that garbage and just evaluate things on an even keel with the exact same standards in mind. And of course, people like Cameron, they don't want that. They have absolutely no interest in, is my religion objectively true? They want, does my religion make me feel good? And that doesn't matter. I agree, this whole idea is dumb. In a discussion between equally rational people with the exact same data and the exact same goals using the exact same methodologies, yes, we ought to give all those people who are using the same stuff the same credibility. But that's not the case here, and that's the problem. So now he goes into his closing for this part. Closing thoughts. Given that equal weight theory is ultimately self-defeating, I can only conclude that Loftus's first consideration doesn't actually warrant skepticism. No, absolutely not. He is missing the problem because he is the problem. I agree it doesn't work, but that's because of the people involved, not the concept itself. If you get people who are after the same thing with the same evidence and the same standards, then sure, we can do that. That's just not how it works in the religious landscape, though, is it? This is a them problem, not an us problem. Not that I think Cameron actually cares. In part 2, we'll discuss the objection from cultural contingency, the idea that because beliefs are tied to a geographical location, skepticism is warranted. I will argue that, far from being an argument against Christian beliefs, it works better as an argument against naturalism. Except I don't think any of those things are at all worthwhile either. We'll get there though, but Cameron is missing the entire point of the outsider's test for faith because he doesn't want to hold a single standard. This is the biggest problem for the religious. They want to feel special. They want to think there's an invisible father figure in the sky just watching over them all the time. But this is all just an emotional reaction on their part. And because they can't take themselves out of it, they can't see the reality for the trees. This is a them problem, as I keep saying. So anyway, what do you think so far? This really comes off as a long series of excuses, which is really all the religious are any good at. They just want to believe. They're happy to run around with the goalposts so long as they can get back to their emotionally comforting conclusions, and that's as far as their mental, with giant air quotes, activities go. But I really want it to be true. No, you don't. You don't have any interest in truth. You are only after comfort. And so long as that's the case, I don't really know what to tell you people. You will keep making complete fools of yourself. And they don't seem to think that's a problem. Do you? I mean, let me know in the comments and I'll see you all next time.